Blue White Illustrated here, sitting exactly where James Franklin was just less than an hour ago, talking about what he had to say when he was sitting right here. I'm Thomas Ryan Carr. This is Nate Bauer, senior editor of Blue White Illustrated. Today's press conference mostly revolved around injuries, which means we mostly didn't have a whole lot to talk about, Nate. What were your takeaways from James Franklin talking about the receiver room outside of Keandre Lambert-Smith and Trey Wallace? Wallace obviously was injured in the game against Indiana, so that room put into doubt in the going forward. So what was your assessment of that conversation today?
Yeah, two Wallaces injured, right? Certainly Trey Wallace. And look, the receivers have been a conversation all year. That they are, again, a conversation is not a surprise, given the fact that if Trey Wallace is out this week or for any amount of time in the future, it changes, right? There are implications to that. It changes the dynamic of what Penn State does. Specific to Trey, James was his typical non-committal self.
Opaque.
Yes. It just no update to provide on Trey. But you could sense, certainly from the way he talked about other things, right? But talking about 12 personnel, talking about some of the other things that they can do, that it feels as though that, right? I mean, he's in a sling on the sideline. Like, okay, let's put two and two together here. It's not great. Yeah. not great. So we'll see what the implications are of that. And then obviously Caden Wallace also was lost for a big portion of the game. That felt, in terms of James's response, like a little bit of a different situation. He said that, and I'm paraphrasing here, he said that Caden would be available, but he also kind of pounded the table talking about Drew Shelton, that they would need Drew this week. So probably a fair expectation, just spitballing here, that while Caden may be available, it's probably unlikely that we're going to see a lot of those guys, if anything, on Saturday against Maryland.
Now, it's always bad to lose your starting right tackle, but in this game, Maryland, a blitzing team, but not necessarily somebody that has somebody. They don't have anybody coming hot off the edge. So in a situation where Penn State needs to have its best offensive lineman out there from a pass protection standpoint, it's never, again, qualifying the death out of this, it's never good to lose your starting right tackle. Yeah. But Drew Shelton, they see him as a starter anyway, and some of the areas where he might be still learning, we might not see that tested this weekend, or we might. You never know. Yeah. But in terms of the offense, it feels like there are. It was just interesting because we've reached the point in the season where we are asking the same questions of James Franklin. At this, there aren't new things going on because the story seems pretty defined, except that you and I kind of have a different feeling about the offense coming out of the game with those final 5 minutes of how Drew Allar played pre and post interception. So we haven't had a chance to talk about this. Yep. You believe that there was some progress there and maybe a step forward from the offense from Drew?
Yeah, I don't know how you could not. I mean, I guess that there's ways to not feel that way, but just given the personality of the team and the offense to this point in the season, look, we talked about it all last week, using the middle of the field. That was a stark thing, right? It was real. It wasn't just a figment of our imagination that was a place that wasn't being utilized for Penn State. Took more shots, right? Like actually
6 deep balls.
Through 6 deep, I assume that's a season high?
Yes. Yeah. So he was, I believe, 3 of 6 in the game of 20-plus yards. Not only the highest completion percentage on deep balls, but the most he's thrown all season.
Right. And guess what? You're not going to come down with all of those. It's not going to be a perfect situation, but also Keandre dropped one, right? So there were things that Drew did that I thought bode well, right? They could be a precursor for a step for him, even if it was an ugly game. Certainly the running game still has things to figure out, but Katron Allen was the player of the game internally for the offense and made some big plays in that game, right? You just saw some steps, it felt like, to me, for where the offense was going. That doesn't mean it was perfect by any means, and there was lots of inconsistency from drive to drive. Yeah. I mean, to me, that was the one thing that stood out, is they had quite a few 10-plus play drives that, right? That, I mean, the drive in the second half to come out in the beginning of the third quarter was excellent. I mean, they just kind of marched down the field. But then you followed up with a couple of 3-and-outs, right? You followed up with not much happening. So finding that consistency, I mean, look, if James Franklin used anyone, if we do a find in page, right, of the transcript after today's press conference, to look up the word consistency, it will be the most used word that he used of any today. And there's a reason for that. Is that this is a fairly inconsistent offense, right? Just on the whole, it hasn't been able to really get it all together. But there are some signs of, it feels to me, again, that progress being made.
I'm going to beat the YouTube comments to the punch and say this. It's the second word, obviously, is the first word that'll be on the page more often. Yeah, and like just to rip the Band-Aid off of all the YouTube comments, you can't say it now because I said it. Defense, talking about the way that the defense played. What else did I miss here in the rundown of things we wanted to talk about? Because we're getting towards the end of. I felt like it was a short press conference on like meaty, weighty subjects. We've had some really good ones. Today felt like kind of rinse and repeat. The offense is inconsistent. Why? And then talking, as you just said, about consistency. So the defensive side of the ball, not consistent last week, but also probably not a concern. Right?
Yeah, no, he thinks that what he said was that they had defined through the course of the season, who and what they are, that they had been, they had established what they were defensively. And basically, he said, I mean, I'm paraphrasing again, but he said, look, sometimes the other guy wins. Like when you play man coverage as much as Penn State has this season, you're going to get beat occasionally. It just hasn't happened all that much to them. So it has created a perception that it doesn't happen. Well, it does. Indiana's quarterback made some great passes. They had a blown coverage, which certainly is something that you don't want to happen, but occasionally happens. So certainly from the defensive side of the ball, they're not panicking. He talked about Manny Diaz's response and some of the things that Manny said. Look, I would assume, based on Manny's body language during the game, that there were some brutal conversations after that game, right? Yeah. There would have been some brutal heart-to-hearts about performance and living up to their expectations that they have defensively. So not a huge deal, but also something that they're aware of and working to clean up.
So if you want any of my thoughts on those things and you want to see some of those coverage busts, go to bluewhiteillustrated.com, T. Frank's film room. I think I did like 2. I was trying to do less work and I ended up doing 2 hours. I made shorter videos, but I made them like more of them. So check out all of that if you want some of the in-the-weeds details about the coverage bust, the consistency of the offense, Drew Allar, any of the things that we covered today. Nate, thank you for your time. We'll bring you more here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. Penn State practice coming up tomorrow. We'll have highlights of that. And, of course, over at bluewhiteillustrated.com, sign up to get inside information from Nate and from publisher Sean Fitz on what they see at practice tomorrow. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. We'll talk to you then.